Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! Quick backstory. I work at a fairly upscale steakhouse restaurant. I'm deaf and work in the kitchen, but sometimes when we're short-staffed and I'm not backed up or not in the middle of something, I'll help carry stuff out to a table real quick. Alright, so yesterday we had 3 waiters called in sick and no one was available to cover for them. Mondays are usually slow anyway, so nobody was too worried about it. Until a huge party came in without reservations. It was 6 adults and 7 kids for one of the kids' birthdays. Again, this is a nice steakhouse. Usually we get a lot of business types or date night couples, not children's birthday parties. The order comes in and everyone at the table gets steak, even the kids. And every kid got it well done. Whatever, we throw it all together and I help the waitress carry it out since no one else is free to help her. I put the last plate I have on a table in front of who happens to be the birthday girl. I see her asking me for something, so I do the universal gesture for being deaf and hurry off to let the waitress know they needed something at the table before going back to the kitchen. I do read lips and speak, but I don't go there with customers at work. Way easier if I just go find someone else to help them out instead. Usually, it's not a problem. Not 10 minutes later, my coworker, the waitress, is tapping on my shoulder, trying to warn me ahead of time. The entitled mother had asked for the manager to complain that I had refused to get her daughter something when the entitled kid asked me for it. I later found out that my coworker had tried to explain to them that I was deaf in an attempt to save me from their wrath. But apparently the child didn't know what that meant and got upset when it was explained to her. So, they went from being pissed I ignored them to traumatized that I exist. I guess. The dumb manager comes barreling into the kitchen talking faster than I can keep track of and drags me back out to this table. The entitled child is crying with his entitled mother patting her on the back and kissing all over her as if her dog died while they were at the restaurant. The mother starts talking angrily to the manager, and I still have no idea what exactly they were saying. But there were a lot of angry gestures, nasty faces, and the kid was crying so hard that if my coworker hadn't warned me what this was about, I would have thought this kid was dying or something. The manager finally turns to face me and asks me to apologize. I assume I've read her lips wrong and ask her to repeat. Nope. She really does want me to apologize to these people. At this point, I am really pissed. I say, "You want me to apologize for being deaf?" The dumb manager says, "It was upsetting to them. Say you're sorry." No way. Other tables are staring at us at this point, and I'm just not willing to go down this road. The entitled mother is talking again, but I still have no idea what she was saying at this point. She kept gesturing to her crying kid and jabbing a finger in my direction with an expression that would make Satan cringe on her face. "Apologize now." Well, that's not gonna happen. The manager is red-faced and looks like she might blow her top at any second. But there was no way I was apologizing to these people. If they had asked me to apologize for ignoring them or whatever, sure. Who cares? But I'm not sorry I can't hear. Actually, I'm pretty thankful at this point. The entitled mother was getting a lot of dirty and annoyed looks, so I guess she wasn't sounding pleasant. I'm fed up with it, so I just head back to the kitchen before they can try to say anything else to me. I guess there was some heated conversation going on behind me, and I looked back there before ducking into the kitchen, and the entitled mother was standing up, possibly screaming in the manager's face. The manager ended up comping their meal and actually threatened to write me up for not apologizing to this crazy lady and her precious 8-year-old shelter snowflake. I've had some interesting reactions from people when I have to let them know that I can't hear, but this was on a whole other level. Update: the manager was fired for this and the family has not come back. If they do, and anyone recognizes them, they will be asked to leave. Also, I feel I need to explain myself a bit here. Some commenters criticized me for not verbally telling the entitled mother and the child that I was deaf. When I say that I can read lips and speak, I don't mean I can magically understand what people say just by looking at their mouths. If I'm talking with someone I don't normally speak to, I may need things repeated a good amount of time before I get what they are trying to say to me. Think 10 plus times repeating a single sentence. I didn't include this in a story, but when the manager was speaking to me, I was needing things repeated during this ordeal. I just didn't want to clutter the story with, and then I needed the manager to repeat herself 15 times before I got what she was trying to say, over and over. Similarly, people who aren't used to my voice and how I speak almost always need me to repeat things or write it down. I don't sound like a hearing person. If I had verbally told these people I was deaf, there is no guarantee they would have understood me, and it's much faster for me to go get an actual server to help them than for me to stand there repeating myself. I'm not really sure how hard it is to figure out what it means when I point at my ear and shake my head. This is the first time in my life that someone didn't understand that gesture. Also, final point, to those saying my grammar is too good for him to be deaf, that's like saying I'm too smart to be deaf. Being deaf does not affect my intelligence. Thank you very much. Oh man, that story was something else. Deaf OP here just trying to do their job at a fancy steakhouse, but who knew it would turn into a full-blown drama with entitled parents and a clueless manager? I mean, can you imagine apologizing for being deaf? Like, what the hell? The entitled mother was on a mission though, and her kid was having a meltdown of epic proportions. And let's not forget the dumb manager who wanted poor OP to say sorry for something they can't control. Not happening, folks. But hey, karma's well, you know what I mean. The manager got what she deserved and got the boot. Good riddance. And the entitled family as well won't be coming back, at least for now. Anyway, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and stick around for the next story, cause who knows what crazy shenanigans we will encounter next. Let's get into the next story. First time posting here, and a long one, so please buckle up. So the story happened back in 2009 when I was starting my sophomore year, 10th grade for anyone unfamiliar with the term. It's more my parents' revenge and I have their permission to post it here. I'm reminded of it now because I was on a date recently and she asked me why I only had one hand on a steering wheel while we were driving to our destination. The answer to that is simple. I grew up on a farm and the first vehicle I learned to drive was my dad's tractor when I was 9. Yes, farm kids learn to drive very early on in life, especially if they are fast-growing bean sprouts like me. Like many vehicles, tractors have the pedals for clutch, brake and gas, and the steering wheel. In addition to those, you have the implement controls for the tools a tractor is pulling alongside the gear shifts and engine speed. These are typically on the right-hand side and usually require you to keep one hand on them, with the other hand on the wheel. These days I drive an automatic transmission vehicle, but having driven tractors and large manual transmission trucks through the fields for so many years as a kid left me with the habit of resting my right arm on the center console, since there is nothing I need to do with it except maybe hold hands with my date. This is something my dad does all the time when he and my mom are in a car together, either on their own or with me and my siblings in tow. And no, for anyone who is wondering, my phone stays in my pocket until I've reached my destination. Answering a text while driving is not worth mine or anyone else's safety. So back to the story. Entering sophomore year, I was now old enough according to my state's laws that I could take a driver's education course, something my high school offered as an extracurricular class. I aced that class in every aspect, until it came time to get in a car with the instructor. The driving portion of the class had 2 sessions each, one in the morning before school started and one in the afternoon after school let out, with extra sessions on Saturdays to handle all the prospective drivers in the class. We were sorted alphabetically, so our instructor, Mrs. Tyrant, had an easier time keeping track of us. She was a thin woman with a constant scowl and despised pointless questions. I got a ride with a friend. The Saturday morning it was his and my turn on a list alongside one other student. It was the weekend before Thanksgiving and getting close to winter, but it hadn't snowed yet and was therefore bone cold outside. Mrs. Tyrant was waiting inside the exam car with the engine running. The other student got out of her mom's truck once she saw us, and her mom and my friend's dad both drive away once we were in the exam car. I was going to be the first to drive that morning with my friend and the other student in the backseat waiting for their turns. We went through the checklist of pre-driving safety checks and then we were on our way. I put the car in gear, rested my arm on the center console since it was an automatic and there was nothing I needed to use it for, I thought, and pressed the gas pedal. Nothing. Both hands on the wheel, Mrs. Tyrant sternly said with her foot on the examiner's brake. I apologized and put my right hand on a wheel, and it was so weird, especially since I was accustomed to not doing that. As such, my right hand slackened and dropped to the center console again before we even left the parking lot. Cue the brake. Both hands on the wheel, Mrs. Tyrant repeated. I tried to explain why it felt weird, but she wouldn't let me get a word in. If you're not going to keep both hands on the wheel, you can use your little phone to call for a ride home. But I don't have a phone, I protested. Really, at this point in time, I didn't have a cell phone, and I'm ultimately grateful to my parents for refusing to buy me one. But this was another point in my teenage years where I wished they would have bought me one. Don't be ridiculous. You kids all have phones, Mrs. Tyrant said as she put the car in park and gestured for me to get out. I complied and tried to get in the back seat while my friend got into the driver's seat. I said call for a ride home, Mrs. Tyrant repeated. My friend tried to talk her out of leaving me there, only for her to threaten him with a failed test. We all know what teenagers can be like, and he chose a driving test over his friend. He and I still talk and play games together from time to time, but he does regret leaving me behind. So, yeah, I was left there, in a school parking lot on a Saturday morning, in the freezing cold, and my only shelter being the school's entryway. Thankfully, I wasn't out there for long, maybe about 20 minutes, when some dude I hadn't met before kept honking until I noticed him. My parents later scolded me for trusting a stranger, and I don't blame them. But at the time I was too cold to care, and his car was warm. Turned out he was a girl's older brother. He had graduated 6 years earlier and was visiting his parents for Thanksgiving that coming week. His sister, the other student, had frantically texted her family since she did have a phone to tell them that I needed help, and he came over to the school straight away to take me back to my house. Mom was furious after I told her what had happened when I got home and called my dad, who was out in the field, who was equally furious at the news. Despite their immediate efforts, Mrs. Tyrant and the school suffered no consequences, since there weren't any security cameras around the school at the time. Meanwhile, I not only ended up with a nasty cold that lasted until after Thanksgiving Day, but also got flunked out of the driver's education course and wouldn't be allowed to take the course again that year. Fast forward to May, the sun was out and shining, and the end of the school year had arrived. The only bad note on my report card was a driver's education course which had done just enough damage to take me off the potential valedictorian lineup for my graduating class. As usual for summer, my dad needed help out in the field, but instead hired a few neighbors so I could take a summer driver's education course that he paid for. So I could be more useful around the place, he joked. But I knew it was because of Mrs. Tyrant failing me before I even had a chance, and that I had otherwise earned the privilege with my good grades. Each day, he or my mom would take the time each day to deliver me to and pick me up from the course in the nearest city about half an hour away. The instructor for this course, Mr. Saint, was a big man with a bellowing laugh, and he took the time to listen to his students' concerns. Eventually, it came time for me to get behind the wheel again. When I told my dad on our way there, he got all thoughtful for a good minute. Son, I want you to briefly explain to Mr. Saint, before you even get in a car with him, that you've been driving tractors for several years now, as well as how the controls, for one, are laid out if he isn't familiar with them, he says to me. I didn't really get it at the time, but I agreed to do just that. And just that I did when Mr. Saint invited me to climb into the driver's seat for my driving exam. He was familiar with the typical layout of tractor controls, so I didn't have to explain it to him. He kept a very careful eye on me and everything I did during the driving exam. And unlike Mrs. Tyrant, he didn't touch his brake once. Just like any farming kid I've had in my courses, your driving is top-notch, Mr. Saint says to me. But why did you feel the need to let me know ahead of time? Well, my dad told me to, I said, pointing to my dad who was waiting in his truck. Mind if I speak with him? Mr. Saint asked. I don't mind, sir, but he's going to want to leave soon so we can get back to work. I'll be sure to make it quick, Mr. Saint said as he went over to my dad's truck. They talked for a couple of minutes and Mr. Saint making notes on his clipboard before Dad waved me over when they were done talking. What did Mr. Saint want to talk with you about, Dad? I asked as I climbed in. Oh, nothing much, Dad replied with a grin as he began to drive away. I tried to get him to tell me what they had talked about, but he remained adamantly silent about the whole matter. A few weeks later, I had my learner's permit and was quickly racking up the hours I needed for my license. The school year started about a month later, and I was asked by a few friends if I would be redoing driver's education. I told him no. I had taken a summer course since my dad needed my help sooner rather than later, and I already had my learner's permit. And that's when I found that Mrs. Tyrant had been fired. Just a week before, and that Mr. Saint would be teaching the course in her place until the school board decided whether they would keep the course or drop it altogether. During my lunch break that first day, rather than eat with my friends, I went to the classroom where Mr. Saint was going to be teaching that afternoon, and I found him sitting behind what used to be Mrs. Tyrant's desk. After a bit of stuttering on my part, I asked him what had happened, and he said he had been recommended by my dad as a replacement when Mrs. Tyrant's teacher's license was revoked, and she was subsequently fired. Also, Mr. Saint told me that my dad had stayed in contact with him after their little chat, and that he had been told of Mrs. Tyrant's treatment of me and possibly other students. Mr. Saint then passed that information along with his records onto the county, who pulled Mrs. Tyrant into a performance review. And yep, I wasn't the only one she had flunked over the years for what was perceived as one of many minor errors in this farmland-rich area. That alone was enough to make sure she could never renew her license ever again. What, or rather who, got it revoked were my parents, who finally had people listening to them. But how Mrs. Tyrant had neglected her duty as a guardian to her students by leaving them stranded in front of the school until they were picked up, and I was simply the final straw. The school board also invested in a security system at this time, so they had video footage for incidents like this that popped up in the future. Furthermore, my driver's education grade was purged from the system, along with anyone else currently in the school who had taken the class under Mrs. Tyrant. Both good and bad. This put me back in the potential valedictorian lineup for my class, much to my parents' delight. Oh wow, that story was like a roller coaster ride. I mean, seriously, who would have thought that a driving lesson could turn into a freezing cold adventure with a grumpy instructor and a heroic older brother coming to the rescue? It's like a mix of comedy sketch and a heartwarming family drama. Seriously, Mrs. Tyrant? What kind of name is that? It sounds like she was living up to her name with that attitude. And then you had Mr. Saint, the hero we all needed, stepping in to save the day. I love how your dad had your back and even set things right with a secret plan. That's some top-notch dadding right there. The best part is that justice prevailed and Mrs. Tyrant got what she deserved, losing her license and all. Kudos to your parents for taking action and making sure nobody else had to suffer her wrath. It's like a victory for all the driving students out there. And hey, now you're back in the running for valedictorian. Talk about turning the tables. So folks, if you want more amazing, hilarious and heartwarming stories like this, you better stick around. There is more where that came from, and don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to the channel, so you never miss a single fantastic tale. And remember, keep both hands on the wheel, just in case Mrs. Tyrant is lurking around there. See you in the next video, and let's keep this awesome adventure going.